Be sure to subscribe and like our channel.
Welcome on this fine rainy Sunday here in Toronto. With me today is Jason Reed. Andrieh is unfortunately ill, so he is not going to be on today. He'll be back with us next weekend, though, on the Saturday. So today's an exception because Jason's in the UK. So this is where we're flipping time, so it works for everybody. However, with that said, announcements from Queen City Curio and Apothecary, we are coming down with our new workshop list. So for sponsors, guess what? You get to request things. People have already requested sweeteners. People have already requested how to do puppet magic and things like that. So we got a list coming up. So just pay attention. You'll get that announcement soon enough. I know some people are even booking us for certain rituals, like Taoist and Buddhist ones. Like we're going to be talking to Jason today about the Taoist side of things. And once July hits up, we're going to be working with the Goetia and Semaphorath with Stephanie Colony. Hardcore rituals back to back. July, 3 years of demon / names of God, angels. It's debatable what type of work that is, but we got that and we have our basic workshop still going. So all that coming forward, you can check us out on QueenCityCurio.ca for all that information, for all the listing of events and any spiritual items you need to assist you on your spiritual journey. So with us today is coming back is Jason Reed. He's graduated from Southampton University in the 1990s with a BA in history. He joined the Royal Navy as a language specialist, traveling the world, speaking and writing Chinese. After the military, he studied occultism and magic, initially in Western mystery traditions. However, he returned to Asia in search of a teacher and met Dr. Lian. So, apprenticed to the Mao Shan sorcerer and martial artist, he studied many aspects of Chinese magic and alchemy. His website is Mao Shan, SHAN, temple.com. And he also has his Twitter there for at Chinese Magic with a K. So, welcome to the show, Jason.
Thank you very much. And thanks for having me a second time, which is...
We love having you on. So, I mean, today we're bringing you on to talk about your new book, the Luban Jing. So give our listeners kind of a synopsis what that is.
Okay. This is an unusual one. Okay. Right. So I was researching sort of like different... I put this word in inverted commas, Grimoire tradition in China. You know, there are books of magic, you know, just like in the West, you know, and some of these are fabled. And one of them is called the Luban Jing, which kind of means the Luban classic. Now, if you go and search this online, what you're likely to find is actually a book of architecture.
Yes.
Luban is actually an architect from around about the Song dynasty, I believe. And he had this, it's kind of like a Chinese Daedalus, like this fantastic mythic figure. You know, he designed these like huge war engines and also designed temples, which I think is a significant point. Okay, let's compare that with, like, for example, Solomon later. So anyway, so Luban was this guy, lived around about the Song dynasty, and he was a temple designer. And there's a lot more to temple design than you'd believe. Well, actually, most esotericists watching this would know, actually.
Right.
That's involved in building a temple. You don't just, like, put up a shack somewhere and, like, put an altar in there. Especially if you know Feng Shui.
Yes.
So Feng Shui was a really important aspect of building temples, plus encoding mystical knowledge into the architecture to reflect the ratios, proportions of Chinese cosmology and metaphysics. So we have that jumping off point for the Luban. Okay, so there are two Lubans. Number one is the architectural Luban. And that's the one that teaches you how to build a temple or a house, the right height of your furniture and the ratios and proportions and the mathematics between different kinds of furniture. Then there's the second Luban. And this is the one, you know, that people whisper about in China, because it's meant to be this mystical book of magical spells, some of them very naughty, if you like. And some of them, well, it's a system of magic that was passed down in the craft tradition. Does this sound familiar?
Yes, absolutely.
Right. So there was a craft edition, like from master to apprentice, which was teaching the system of magic, and that's what's encoded. It's not encoded actually. It's what's giving in the Luban, and that's the book that I translated using about 2 or 3 manuscripts, which I mailed to give to the Western reading public. Now, the reason I did this is it gives you a bird's eye view of the magical tradition in general.
Yes.
Okay, so it will give you some of the traditional spellcraft which was being operated around about a mid to late Ming and early Qing dynasty.
Right. And it's also like you got older variations in there too, from what I saw, right?
Absolutely.
Because it's like if we're talking feng shui, I mean, now we're getting to these practical things like why don't you put a talisman in your friggin' the roof, right? Like that's actually like I know this from feng shui pieces. Like people will put things in the roof tiles, and you're like, really? You're a jerk. You put a tile that's been like because they didn't pay you or whatever it is. It's things like this that actually seem very sorcery-like with this type of tradition, and it is.
I mean, you got similar traditions in the West, right? You know, like I'm from England, and you know, and it wasn't that long ago. You know, up to the 19th century at least, people were still putting protective objects in their house, whether it's a witch ball or sort of like burying horse skulls or dead cats under the foundations and things like this. Not that I'm recommending this, by the way, folks. So
no, we don't recommend it. However, if you like to pull some Godfather-ish type of architecture, that's on you listeners who are being creative.
But so yeah, there's this tradition of like in building things into houses, which but the Luban expands further from that, of course. So for me, an interesting parallel was in Western situations where you have this craft tradition where magic is taught like from master to apprentice, and it's literally called the craft in the Luban as well. And you had a very similar thing going on in China as well as the West. I found this really interesting. So, for example, you had the Society of the Horseman's Word, which was like a society, and you know they had this initiation ritual. They had these secret magical techniques for controlling horses and people by sort of like comparison. And also there's another one called the Society of the Miller's Word, believe it or not, which gets closer to the Luban thing actually. And again, they had the initiation rituals, and they had a rumored a little book of magic which they were taught and so on. So there's an interesting parallel there. There's always been this association of magic and certain types of craftsmen, like the blacksmith and the woodworker, which is what Luban was mainly doing, and stonework is implied there. So this link between magic and craftsmanship is quite an interesting one.
Well, and I think it's also important to understand, like, Luban later becomes a god of architecture and craft work or buildings. However, when you look at the historical background, he's coming from this almost, at least the historical character Luban, is coming from the spring and autumn annuals, which is a time of the Civil War. So when you're talking about buildings in particular, and using it to get advantages, that's not talking about just straight things like, okay, we got the sorcery that changes the dynamics of the people in the building unconsciously, but we're also talking about land signatures now on a greater level to possibly even transform a battlefield to make advantages to you. Now that's on a greater level, but if you're the architect,
sure,
you have these
this
implications.
Sure. I mean, this links with another art, which is implied in the Luban called Qimeng Dongjia.
Correct.
It's just really difficult to translate this one, but basically it kind of means a lot of people, I suppose it would be mystic door invisibility art.
Yeah, something along those lines.
Close translation, but it's not exact. It's the best we can do at the moment. But it's not. It's kind of a system of divination, but it isn't.
Yeah.
it's more about finding strategies on the for battle. But even though now you put it to the battle of life rather than
because I mean, people will start using that in boardrooms and things like that. They're like, position your head. This is where you do the invocation.
Sure.
I looked at that. I was like, fancy trick work you guys have there.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like for example, I suppose the most famous user would have been Zhuge Liang.
Yes.
Like Kong Ming, maybe people know him better as. But if you read the Luban very carefully, you'll see references to Qi Dong Jia, which is another important point, because Qi Dong Jia had a magical side to it, which you don't often see in modern books on Qi Dong Jia. You know, it's Qi Dong Jia now is kind of like, I don't know why, but in the East in particular, it's kind of turned into a business model.
It has.
You know, so it's taken away from its kind of like magical roots. But a real book on Qi Dong Jia would have like sections on talismans and evocation, and something called Zhen, which are like arrays, which is like battle formations, which aren't just on the battle, but something you can arrange in your home too, you know, for a magical effect. This is all implied in the Luban Jing if you read very carefully. Like, for example, there's a set of talismans in there. I call it talismans, but actually the talismans is the final product. Okay, there's a whole process before that. The talisman is just the end result. So it goes on the assumption that you've studied Taoist arts already. You know Qi Dong Jia, possibly some other systems of astrology or whatever. And that you can, so get back to the set of talismans. The set of talismans in there where you can use the power of the elements. Which in Chinese are slightly different from the Western ones. You know, wood, metal, fire, and so on are the ones that you'll be familiar with being a TCM practitioner.
Yep, we got those phases.
And there are ways of using that to your advantage in battle or in hiding, running away. More hiding than running away. Concealing yourself is probably a better word for this.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is where it's like, do you want to battle or do you want to hide? There's a time and place for everything. This now gets into Art of War things, but this is kind of the context that we're thinking in with the Luban. It's like, if you don't need to do the fight, save your resources to do something else. Live another day.
Yeah, sure. So there's a lot of ideas in Luban which will introduce Western readers to a lot of ideas which that kind of seem familiar, right? You know, you might have seen manga or something, or ninja movies.
Yeah, absolutely. All about the anime and manga.
But this is the real thing.
Yeah.
Right. So it will introduce the reader to some maybe new ideas and novel ideas.
Right.
Which are peculiar to Chinese magic.
Now, in particular, with the book, there's a lot of different spells, and I mean, you broke them up into different sections, right?
Actually, it's a direct translation. I didn't break them up.
Or it's been broken up as like you have those sectionized areas, and one of them was essentially calling spirits into objects and going through those areas. So can you get into a little bit about that? Because I mean, there's things like, you know, we have food dogs and things like that you can use as house protector, or even the Monsan, which is those door spirits. Right?
Okay. Right. Which section are you talking about? There's a few.
Right. Any one of them in particular, just around just you working with the spirits to augment your house.
Like Willow Boy, for example. Okay. Yeah, this is really old magic. You can read about this in the Andrieh manuscripts. You know, the medical and manuscripts that are found in. Yeah, so even in there, you've got the sort of like wooden doll or pop, whatever you want to call it. So the idea is to for a spirit to manifest in our lives, we need something, a vessel to hold it in. That's the basic idea. Okay. In some cultures, it would have been like jars, like voodoo, for example, the gobi, that sort of thing.
Yep.
But in China, it's always been the wooden doll was a prominent one. It's usually made of willow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is a wood associated with the dead.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so essentially it's a necromantic rite. So be careful, folks. Right. So, in the wooden doll, usually was had some little things put inside. Okay, it could be minerals, herbs, or even insects, which is part of the charging process for the wooden doll.
Mm-hmm.
Which might be familiar to like Barden students, actually, by the way.
Right.
So, and then you would link a spirit to this wooden doll. And then here's the important part: you would cultivate it over time to actually create a. So the spirit doesn't just come in and it's like, oh, it's there, now I can act. It had to be cultivated, developed by thought energy and heavenly energy, earth energy, literally to give birth to the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And then it becomes something called in China called an ear whisper spirit. It's meant to whisper in your ear some secrets. Right, that sort of thing. But this is a really old idea, which goes back to shamanic practices of keeping the ashes of the ancestors in wooden figures.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably where it evolved from. So.
Yeah, and I mean, with the translation you did, you do see, because again, you have translations from old culture, like, you know, we're talking about like king, father of the East, queen, mother of the West. We have those conversations with those spirits, and then you see later on, in different areas, they'll be talking about Skanda and all these other Buddhist figures. So it's with the Luban, it's interesting to see how it's evolved through the dynasties, and it just keeps compiling onto itself as a grimoire.
Sure. I mean, you see that with Western grimoires too. You know, so I suppose the classic example is the Key of Solomon.
Mm-hmm.
You know, which is I suppose it started off with the really early versions were like pretty sparse. You know, like lists of demons who kind of like make you ill, you know, that sort of thing. You just got a list of names to call. But as time goes on, the Key of Solomon becomes more and more complex. You know, so by the 16th century, you know, you have old gods which had their names a bit corrupted, and you know, sort of like
right. So
you didn't get the same process of corruption in the Luban. It kept quite, you know, Puan Fo is Puan Fo. There's no.
So, from a practical manner, with people coming like they're new to the Luban, do you find that when people are practicing with the Luban, that, you know, between the distinctions between these older deities and these newer ones, we would say, if there is that stack up, or is there a particular frame, like obviously we're taking it from a Taoist perspective? So, would you use like Lao Tzu, to work as intermediary to kind of work between those spirits?
Well, you can tell, yeah. Generally, being a Taoist, you'd used two deities.
Right.
They're both in the Luban. One being Taishang Laozhong, okay, which is like a spiritual form of Lao Tzu, if you like. Even though I'll just explain this now. Like Taishang Laozhong is explained as the spiritual emanation. Lao Tzu is the spiritual emanation of Taishang Laozhong, the physical representation, who's incarnated as various teachers through time. So that's one of the key figures. Most of the spells will end with his name, you know, either come Taishang Laozhong, Jiji, whatever. And there's another one, Luban, obviously. You know, Luban was the master magician, and there's some others as well. Like there's a primordial god, often called Hundun Laozhong. which is like a mysterious figure. You know, we obviously, because it's from the primordial times, the time before time. So you will see this in the Luban as well, as a key figure in the actual invocations of the Luban Grimoire.
Mm-hmm. So with that, would you suggest people work with those spirits ahead of time before they get into the Luban, or is it just see a spell that's written there and just kind of get into it? Like, how would you recommend newcomers?
Well, if you were going to work with the Luban, okay, which is not, I'm going to give you a warning, it's not the safest thing to do. Okay, you must be careful, but that's with any magical work. There's a small initiation ritual, okay, which is a real one. You know, I don't make these things up. But I you know,
you translate.
I have to say this because so many people do. You know, you kind of just like make these things up and slap it in a book and call it Chinese. There's a small initiation ritual which doesn't take very long, which initiates you into the craft, the Luban craft, and I'd recommend that you do this first. Another difference is you can't just read a spell out the book and say, no, this is not kitchen witchery. Yeah, it's a system of cultivation, and this is a big difference. You can't just open a book, read the spell, and then, you know, the winds and rains like come like pouring down from your invocations.
It would be great if it was that way, right? I mean, all movie-esque now, and we're talking about the craft now. Like, that's a Hollywood stereotype.
Well, I'm British, so I just have to walk out in a t-shirt and it starts raining, right? So, anyway, yeah, so spells have to be cultivated. After sometimes a Luban will give you directions on how to do that. You have to cultivate the spell over time, practice it. You know, like a gong fu or something. You don't just walk into a gong fu studio and you're like Yi Xiao Long, you know,
right?
You have, you know, practice, which is often the thing that I find is forgotten in Western magic sometimes. That you can't just go to Waterstones. Do you have Waterstones in Canada? It's like a major.
We do. Yeah.
Okay, can't just go to Waterstones, pick a book off the shelf, take it home, and go start cackling and say I'm a witch, and then read a spell out the book, and that's it. There's work to be done, and then just maybe then with the right conditions, something will happen.
Right. So with the initiation process, then it's like there's almost a few prerequisites before you even have to touch the Luban. Like you might need to have some basic mediumship skills or divination skills.
Sure.
Coming into it.
I personally think that now, if you read the Luban carefully, there's a section. I'm not going to tell you where, because I want the reader to do the work. I'm not going to do the work for you.
Absolutely.
Okay. There's a section in there which will teach you how to cultivate. Right from the beginning, do the initiation, and then search for the part which is actually about the cultivation. Okay, everyone out there, if I say golden light for starters, you know what I'm talking about. It's basic to every Maoshan tradition, as far as I know. You know? Yeah. There's it will give you processes there like light meditations.
Right.
And so on. Look for it carefully, you'll find it. Okay. And there's another one called the bowl meditation, which is really important because as well as a standard, like you could call Golden Light pretty much standard Negong.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
Essentially, right? But there's another thing that we do, okay, which is you have a bowl filled with water. You find the water bowl is pretty much popular. It's pretty much the method of spiritual communication among the Hakka people, for example, where a lot of magic comes from, I think, and various other Southwest Chinese all along the Sichuan Plateau as well. The water bowl is the main, the Fa Wan is called. Method bowl, law bowl, Dharma bowl. are all valid translations. And you pour a lot of energy into this bowl, and each day you drink it. Okay, just to get a little bit of that physical. How do I translate this? Wei Li, which is like a kind of a spirit.
Yeah.
So Wei Ling, if you like. So, and there's another clue to how you proceed with the Luban. If you have no Wei Ling, which means spiritual power you can express or manifest, then there's no magic possible. Another one is you have to. The Luban teaches this. Now I'm not going to go into this too deeply, but we come here as manifest on Earth. We come here with karma. So it's a basic teaching, yeah. And we have a karmic debt. And we have now, the reason a lot of the Luban teaches this, so I'm not saying this is a hard fact. In fact, Taoism teaches it generally. Okay. Now, when we are born onto the earth, we have this karmic debt, which is like this. It kind of tips the balance. So every time we try to do any magic, it's not really working. We have this karmic debt. And the Luban teaches a process where you can balance that up and the magic starts to work. Does that make sense?
Absolutely makes sense. I mean, this is, again, if we're looking at this with what you described, I mean, you said, okay, light body meditations, and then you're talking about essentially using a bowl. I mean, we would use that in medical Qigong quite a bit to boost you up, right? So that's where in medical Qigong, you might use actual herbs with the bowl, or it could just be bowl water, but you're actually like infusing your Qi to the bowl. So it's almost, it's a talisman essentially.
Yeah, actually, not your Qi. That's
Right.
a difference. That's a really big difference between Qigong and Neigong. If it's your Qi, it's, not as good as like Tian Qi, for example.
Right.
We become a vessel for that Qi. And
Yeah.
of course, there's a certain amount of purity that needs to be done for this as well. Otherwise, the Qi coming through is...
well, yeah, I mean, a muddy pond's going to have muddy water.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
So that is kind of one of these things where we're actually seeing you're infusing your body with a purification rite in some shape or way, right?
Yeah.
So in many ways, if we're having that as a prerequisites to working with the Luban on with initiations with actual possible mediumship skills or astrology or whatever it is,
Yeah.
we can see how this is actually almost a step-by-step book in many ways if you are having the right structures around you to work with that.
Sure.
And now using physical structures to augment that. I mean, I'm going to use the Dragon Ball Z reference here. It's like you're in the zero gravity chamber.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. So really good point. So, talking about the Luban, just to make some recommendations. If you're a Western magician, you're not really into the Taoist thing. Yeah. The best thing that you can do is look at the essence behind the spells, the logic behind them. And then you can take that away and apply it to your own Hermetic magic, for example, or your Wiccan, or, that sort of thing. So there's something there for everyone, new lessons to learn. Yeah. So not everyone wants to be a Taoist, or not everyone wants to be a Buddhist, so, and we appreciate that. And so the Luban, you can take it as a book of magic and look at the essence behind the form that you see, because actually the form's a human construct anyway.
Right.
Partly, actually, a lot of people would argue with that actually, right? So a lot of it is a human construct. So the best thing to do is look behind the essence of what's going on there. Yeah. And see what you can apply to your own practice, whether you're hoodooist or a Vudon, whatever, and see what you can apply there. And for other people, it's just an interesting, entertaining book, right? So,
Right. I mean, I found it particularly interesting with the book when they're talking about the most basic things, like how do you work on a kitchen? How do you work on your living room? what does that represent in your life? I mean, from a craft architecture standard, that makes perfect sense. But when you start looking at Taoism, now you're talking about 9 palaces and how that represents a microcosm within a macrocosm within yourself.
Sure.
So that I found particularly interesting because there's a lot of magical elements that are understated when you start talking about room construction.
Sure. I mean, the temple is a model of man. Man is a model of the cosmos. So it's all interrelated. What's our central beam, really? Our central pillar is our Tai Chi pole. Or what would tantrics call it? I forget all my tantric knowledge now. Right? The Sushumna, I think.
Right.
So you have all these ideas which are there. What's the kitchen? It's your digestive system, and so on. If you read the classics, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Like there were certain ministers associated with certain organs of the body, and that's also reflected in the temple and house structure. Yeah. So so the kitchen. I'm always talking about this. The kitchen. You know, a lot of people think, why are the Chinese so fascinated with kitchen gods and kitchens? But actually, the West was as well.
Mm-hmm.
If you go back, say, Roman history and Greek history, you had Vesta and Hestia, which are 2 goddesses of the hearth, which is, in essence, the fire of the house, the light of the house. And it's the same. The only difference is the Chinese retained that through all the years. Even though there are certain, I guess, corrupted versions of it in English folklore, like New Year's Eve, for example. There's a lot of fireplace divination in England and Scotland, and so on. There's a lot of kitchen magic as well in English folk tradition.
Yes.
So you can see those remnants of it, which must have been really important at one time in the West. I kind of lessened to a degree, but the Chinese kind of kept that going.
Oh, we're foodies. We are foodies. I could say that straight up. I mean, I always joke around where I'm like, Chinese people are like Italians. We just eat whatever. We do the chop suey. You throw it in a pot. You do what you gotta do.
Oh, absolutely. My wife is Chinese, so when I have dinner with her family, it's like this huge table with spins round, and everyone's like. Shares
family style. You fend for yourself, and then maybe someone will be nice and give you some food too.
I'm quite good with the chopsticks now, so I'm not too bad. But when I was first there, I was fighting for the food.
Well, yeah, it's like the whole Kung Fu Panda thing. You're like, you want that dumpling? You get that dumpling yourself.
Yeah, I could do the noodles around the chopsticks now.
Yeah. But even such a simple thing like chopsticks, I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, again, when we're talking about kitchen, I mean, you're talking about like even food blessings in the Luban too. And it's like how you would cook it. But even at chopsticks, a simple thing like that, that's actually magical if you actually know what you're doing with them. Like by the diameter and the length and all these things. It's actually quite interesting how far the cosmology and mythology goes into everyday things in Chinese culture. Which I keep seeing striking in the Luban consistently. It's like, this is everyday stuff. Chop wood, carry water, eat, go to the bathroom, that type of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So it does start off with that mundane magic, which is more feng shui related. But if you think, now it looks like a simple spell on the surface, but if you start reading it and applying it on all 3 levels, heaven, earth, and man, then you start to really understand the Luban. And if you go to the back in the appendix, you'll find a bit about the Luban ruler, which is all about vibration and ratio, and how you can apply cosmic proportion.
Right.
Yeah, for the price of $7 from a shop, you can buy a special Luban ruler and start measuring up. And, there are certain lengths and measures which are considered auspicious or inauspicious. And you've got a different set, one for the yang world, the one we live in, one for the yin world, where the spirits and the dead live. So, to put it simply, I'm simple.
Yeah,
so that's interesting.
it is very interesting. I know, like, especially with, like, again, people typically look at feng shui as like, oh, it's just, you know, you move some objects in your house. And again, I do feng shui, right? My family does feng shui. So this is where I would look at that and be like, what are you thinking? Like, yes, objects do shift energy, but there's a lot more things. Never mind the funeral feng shui. That is a whole different ballpark on how that gets applied. And I know in the Luban, they do talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of funeral stuff going on in the Luban. There's a whole section on it, you know, which I found fascinating.
Absolutely.
Because I studied feng shui too. Obviously, we have to. It's one of the 5 arts. And actually, the funeral feng shui was the original feng shui.
Yes, it was.
That was before, you know, the kind of like you developed the other systems like 8 mansions and Flying Star. They come in a bit later. Right?
Yeah, they do. They really do.
The original one, I guess it's Dragon Shaking Its Tail, and the Book of Burial, which was looked at how our ancestors affect the quality of life of the descendants. And the idea was to put the ancestors in a good place. Because nowadays we think about this is why I'm constantly stressing this idea. We think of ourselves as individuals, but actually that's a bit of an illusion, because we're part of this, you know, oneness. And so if you have this oneness and you step that down a little bit, you have the family, which is like a single thread, a red thread it's called, like which goes through time and space. And that medically speaking is our Jing, which we inherit from our parents, and they inherited it from. So feng shui works towards improving the destiny, if you like, of the descendants. So it seems to be about the dead, but it's actually about the living as well, mainly. So
absolutely. I mean, this gets into fundamental things across, I would say, most cultures, at least where it is. You work with your ancestors, and then your life quality gets better because family understands family. Obviously, we work with the ones that love you. That's what we want to aim for. However,
absolutely. I find this with every tradition, like especially the African traditions seem to retain a bit better than most, like Fudon and Santiago.
Absolutely.
Kind of the first work will be ancestor work. Yeah, simple as that. If you don't even have the support of your own family and your descendants, and your ancestors, you're not ready for magic, full stop. Right.
Well, and I think it gets into simple things like we know from a scientific basing. I think it's like you go back 2-3 generations. They actually have said this scientifically. You retain all the issues of those people in your direct DNA. So by healing those people through ancestor work, you're ultimately healing yourself to move forward.
Sure.
Which, if we're talking about this from a like yin feng shui type of perspective, it makes sense now why you would want to make sure they're good, and then you might have an ancestor room or ancestor temple in a certain designation area, and then go to them and petition and ask for help when you need it, because family's going to look out for family ideally. That's that loving relationship.
Well, you're not separate from your family,
right?
You're not actually separate from your family. Now, the occasional person, I don't really do clients very much, but the occasional I do. A lot of the problems actually come from a breaking off of their ancestors. You know, there are certain ways to read it in their face. Certain signs. So, a lot of people who struggle with money, for example, wealth, often they've cut off that flow, which should come from the ancestors.
And we could directly tie that into like Chinese face reading, which, I mean, we definitely use in classical Chinese medicine, where you could look at the philtrum and say like, well, how are you spending your essence? How is this working with your peeps? right? Because I know classics, they would say,
Yeah,
well, it is like you were born of essence, but they're saying you were born of ancestors, really. So
yeah,
that connection is your life force. And if that goes out, well, we have a very different question to ask now.
yeah, right. So we do have to look. I mean, even a good doctor will look at your family history to ascertain your health. You know, same for feng shui and same for Taoist medicine. You know,
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I mean, this is a vast tome of different things. Is there any area you found particularly drawn into while you were doing these translations or just practicing yourself?
well, a lot of them are familiar to me already because there's a couple of traditions in China, like one being Maoshan, yeah, another one called Meishan. Okay, I won't go into what the whole history of it, but a lot of these arts. Okay, now the problem is I don't know which way around it was. Did Maoshan and Meishan take it from the Luban, or did the Luban take it from Maoshan, Meishan, or was it a bit of both? You know, so, or was it a common stock of knowledge,
Right.
which kind of circulated around South China, you know, and mainly southern China, Jiangsu, and particular, and so that's an interesting question, one I can't answer. So that fascinated me from a kind of scholarship point of view. Yeah.
Right. Which one came first and dive into that whole rabbit hole.
But there's no way of knowing.
Right.
Ultimately. Right. But I've seen, for example, I've seen some spells and I've seen some of the spells from the Luban in Japan as well.
Yes.
Especially with the shinobi crowd.
Yes. Yep, they absolutely have it. I mean, a lot of ninja stuff. I mean, even the 9 cuts. I mean, that's straight up Taoist magic there, where you're actually doing the koji. So
yeah, from the original 9 cuts. That's from Zhou Tianquan Nu, who's teaching of all people a god called Chou Yi. Teaches them the 9 cuts, and I've forgotten the name of the book, of the classic, but you'll find it there. You know, a good 900 years before you see it in Japan. You know, I think it's called the Jade Casket or something. Jade Casket Classic. But you see the 9 cuts for the first time, even before Bao Proofs and all that. It's mentioned in passing, right? But that all relates to the the Big Dipper, 9 stars, stuff like that. You know.
Stuff like that. Don't die from a tiger while you take a hike in the mountains.
Yeah, sure. But there's a deeper teaching to it. You know, but that's not the subject for the Luban, even though it does discuss the Big Dipper stepping. Okay, and the Bagua stepping, not to be confused with the martial art of the same name. Okay, it does discuss another aspect that interested me was the idea of traveling in the spirit vision, if you like, to visit the underworld, which is a fascinating topic for me personally, because that really betrays its shamanic origins.
Right.
Yeah. Your spirit is sent out to go somewhere. Okay, and that's the bit that interests me personally the most, right? Even though the Luban itself is a little vague on the topic, I did add an appendix which explains, should you want to try it, right? A way to do it, right? So this idea of sort of like soul exploration is particularly fascinating for me personally. Maybe because I like to travel, you know, right? So
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, this book with the translation, there's just so many different areas you can go down to where it's like, go get food, go build a house, go, make sure people who piss you off don't get food. It's like very basic stuff, but when you're actually looking at it, you're like, this actually makes a difference in a magical context, right?
Yeah.
And it leads up where they start you from the most basic needs. It's like Maslow's hierarchy. It's like, here's your basic needs, and if you want to go higher up the echelon, you absolutely can, but they make no qualms about keeping to your basics first, which I found like with this translation and just this style of magic, if we have to even call it style, it's like it's refreshing to say, yeah, keep your basics first, keep grounded, get your life issues in order first, and then we can talk about all this other fun stuff.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right, quite right with the Maslow pyramid and all that. I think a lot of people have this guilt complex brought over from maybe Christianity, where they feel like, well, you know, if I use magic to bring fortune to my life or love into my life, then I you know, I'm doing something wrong here and the universe will curse me. No, the universal curse is that you are living in poverty and you don't have love in life and you feel alienated.
Yes.
Yeah. The universe is a bountiful place. Okay, right. Or it should be. You know, there are forces in the world that don't want you to be healthy, wealthy, and wise. Yeah, right. And I guess part of the Chinese magical idea is to bring you those things. You know, some fortune, some luck. You know, to use a bad translation, to bring you. For us, I'm not saying poverty is, but for us, if you're not getting what you want into your life, that is a form of illness. Okay, just as much as I get a headache or flu because of excess and deficiency of yin and yang, the very fact that you're not getting enough to live in your life. I'm not talking about greed here. That's a different thing. Okay, you're not getting enough to live in your life comfortably. Okay, then that's an illness too. Yeah,
Absolutely. Like, I could say this pretty straightforward to people. You know, when I'm teaching Chinese medicine, yeah, we're going to be talking about Chinese medicine, but these are metaphors for your life. So when we say you have wind, you have dampness, you have a deficiency, what are we actually trying to remedy here? What we're trying to say is we can go with a nice idea of, oh, well, it's just an energy paradigm. All right, fine, I'm okay with that. But that says you still lack that energy, which has a certain quality.
sure.
So if we are saying you need herbs to facilitate fire, that means you're missing southern energy, you're missing warmth in your life. If wind comes about, which is a passage in Chinese medicine, then that's maybe you're not good with change and it just screwed you up. So now you're bewildered. Right.
Yeah, sure.
So like this is a core crux, at least in Chinese culture, where we don't make a separation between the spiritual world and the physical world. Both are one and the same. It's just which way does it express, and that becomes a harder question.
Sure. I mean, that's basically what we do. We can work both ways, actually.
Yeah.
We can work physical upwards. This is what most of us do. You know, we get an education, and then a job, and you can also work spiritually downwards. You know, you can. So I find this, and medicine, Chinese medicine, tends to work. You know, spiritually to physically. You know, so and Chinese magic too. So
yeah,
there's an interaction between. It's very easy to think of these planes as theosophical. You know, like layer cake. You know, it's not. You know, right? It's like they kind of hear the independent thing. You know,
it's a soup, right? It's like, how are you differentiating the soup? I don't know. Is it a piece of corn here or is it a carrot? It's still in the soup.
But it's absolutely not a layer cake. You know, like lower astral. Yeah, it's just a convenient way of looking at things. You know, so Chinese beliefs tend to have it. You know, they do the layer cake thing sometimes, just so we can analyze certain components of it. Like if we analyze a quantum particle, for example, you know, we have to like have a freeze frame mathematical formula or something, but that's not really it. You know, it's just a symbol to look at the concept behind it.
Mm-hmm.
So what we've not got to do is confuse the language with the thing itself, which is often a mistake in magic and occultism in general, Taoism and so on. Yeah. And it's also a thing that causes a lot of religious war as well, so and misunderstanding. So we shouldn't take too many ideas to the words that describe things, or the classification systems that we use, or the symbols that we use.
Well, it's very much like the elephant in the blind man and the elephant parable, right?
Sure.
Everyone's trying to describe something. Is it a tail? Is it a tusk? Is it skin? Everyone thinks it's whatever they have, but it's an elephant. So, so this is where at least
not be but a goodie. Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
Right, and this is where we can look and say, well, all right, what is again? I can't say this is the Taoist worldview because there's so many different worldviews even within Taoism. However, it's what's your experience, and this goes back to what you were even saying earlier. It's like, well, if you have an ailment such as I don't know, say money issues. Do you want to change that as a reality? Because that's a choice. It might be tough to change the energies there. You might have some obstacles there. However, with the Luban and with any general cultivation practices we're describing, that's really how you move forward.
Yeah, like for example, if you look at sort of like two basic magical issues, like sort of like I suppose the financial one is a common one,
right?
Why people come to magic. And now if you look at that financial angle, the Chinese would look at your descendants first, but a banker would look at the same thing and say, well, how are your family spending money? You know, what habits have you picked up? You know, so so a lot of that ties in with Chinese ideas anyway, you know. So,
right.
I personally, I picked up some bad habits from my parents. My parents picked up bad habits from, you know, and so on.
Right.
So a way we can. So when dealing with our ancestors, we have to realize they're not perfect. You know, in fact, they've probably done some atrocious things. You know, I'm half British, as you know.
Absolutely.
You know, and some of my ancestors probably did things which were really disturbing. You know, like going right back to like Anglo-Saxon times. We have. So part of our work is to deal with that too, not brush it under the carpet. So.
Right, and this is having that honesty check on yourself now, right? So.
Sure. And how is this coming out in me now? And by dealing with our ancestors like that, we deal with ourselves. You know.
I mean, the time has gone by quick. We're on the 53-minute mark, so I mean, it goes by fast when we have these discussions, Jason. So, is there anything coming up for you that you'd like to let our listeners know about?
Yeah. So I'm obviously Luban's about to be published. I can't give you an exact date on that just yet. I think my publisher's making a good job of it, you know, because there's a lot of illustrations and so on. So it's a little bit harder to, you know, fit together, but that'll be coming soon. And currently, as you know, I'm writing a Chinese magic series, you know, so people have got a library they can go to, which will actually teach them the real thing, or they can consult the real thing. So next up on the way is a series of teachings on Chinese ghosts and necromancy and ancestors, and that's coming up. And that looks at some peculiar necromantic beliefs in Chinese culture. Some of them positive and some of them negative. Okay. For example, the Yin Shan sect, Yin Mountain, or Guishan, Ghost Mountain sect, which is this particular sect in Hunan, which my teacher happily had a teaching in. And I'll include some of those teachings. And interestingly, they're far more tantric. There's a lot of Sanskrit mantras involved, more so than Mao Shan. So where that came from, I don't know. I would really like to find out. You know, so and there's some teachings that I'm going to write in this book about the Yin Shan sect as typical of the necromantic magic. from that, and from necromancy, from some other classics like the 10,000 methods returning from the ancestors and stuff like that. So that's coming next.
Cool.
So what it's looking at is the history of spirit. You know, when you talk about ghosts, you've got to talk about a whole load of other stuff.
Yeah, you do.
You know, you're looking at ancestors and how we can contact them. You're looking at, as you say, yin jai feng shui. Okay, we're looking at that. Because if you have not got that right, why you can't be doing ghost work, as they call it, like a guifa, right?
Absolutely.
So, and then I'll be looking at the development of the ghost as an entity in Chinese literature and belief, and of how the soul was seen and how that developed. Looking at things like Jing or soul shock.
Yep.
Yeah, like you can lose chunks of your soul, or even the whole thing if you're not careful. Like one of the first rituals I had to do when I joined Mao Shan was to have my soul recollected back into me. Because as you live through life, you lose bits of this, and so you're not absolutely complete in yourself. Yeah, maybe you had a trauma in your life, and, or something, and you've lost a fleck of that essence, soul essence. Anyway, I'll be looking at all these different beliefs and then venturing into actual necromantic techniques as practiced by the Yin Shan sect.
Right.
So that's really interesting.
Definitely let us know when you pop that out. We'll bring you back on. It's always fun time.
Yeah.
So.
Right. Yeah. So that's what's coming next. I do have a website now, and I have a Twitter, and I'll drop them below in the comments section on the YouTube. Hopefully getting something there.
Yep. So, I mean, for audio listeners, because this will be on podcast format soon enough, it'll be on in a few weeks, actually, because we're still, we go through the edits and things. Okay. With that, it's you can go to twitter.com/Chinese Magic with a K. And then with that, for his website, you can go to MAOSHAN temple.com. And that's his website and Twitter there. So you can check those out on the audio if you're listening. If you're live, you'll have that in the description there, in the YouTube description. Yeah, so with that, then, for us at Queen City Curio, we have events coming up, but we are still formulating them. So you'll see that on our website soon enough. All right. So with that, we're looking at things like sweeteners. We're looking at things like requested by people. More tarot stuff, more crystal stuff, and then working really on possibly even things like there's just so many different things people were requesting from us, so we just have to get it in a list, put the events up, and as you know,
I understand. I'm so busy myself. Right. I think you guys are great. Yeah, you were the first podcast I'd want to come on because. No. So open-minded and welcoming. Yeah, so that's great.
Well, we definitely appreciate having you on, Jason. So if people like to be...
Yeah, you got a great lineup coming up as well. I had a look earlier on. Yeah.
So this is where if people want to become a member, you can go to as low as $10 a month. You could go to Queen City Curio /become a /pages /become a member, and for $10 you can come in for one live workshop or one live ritual a month. You get access to take out our library books, which we'll have the Luban in print form at some point whenever the publisher sends it to us, and then I would hold it up on the screen so you can imagine the screen there with the title. But I mean, Jason's been very generous about his other books here, so we do have them too, like his Fox Magic book, and I think it's a Thunder Magic book too. So he's been very generous if you want that preview, and if you keep that book too long, we're going to say, hey, buy it from Jason. So that's the way it goes. So we have over 1,000 books currently that you can peruse. If you just want to come in and read a book, we're cool with that too. It's a public library, and we have public altars outside, so you can connect with your ancestors. We have a Buddhist altar, and we have a building Shinto altar. So all those things are for the public. You don't even have to come into the store. That's for you guys. to do the work you need to do. And our dead altar has multifaceted dead lords. So we have some Chinese ones, we have some Hindu ones, we have everyone you can think of, like voodoo, obviously. So it doesn't really matter what paradigm you're coming in from. That's to help you connect to your ancestors as a starting piece. So with that, we'll end off saying stay safe, stay healthy, and next week we're going to have a fun conversation with Khalifa Karras, where we're going to be talking about, with a three-way panel with Andrieh, myself, and Khalifa, about the evil eye, and actually what it means in a practical sense, not just a theoretical sense, but practically what does that mean, and how do you defend yourself, and how do you even use it in a way, and from an influence standard, and many other things like that. Right, so we're going to get into those nitty gritty bits next week. So, with that,
my mother.
everyone,
This is a really big thing in Italy. So,
so we'll be getting into those nitty gritty pieces next week, Saturday, 6 p.m. EDT. So, with that, have a great week, everyone.
Okay, well, 再见.